Are we there?
We are. I'm ready whenever you all are.
Okay,
Hmm.
great. Well, thank you all. Thanks for bearing with us for a few minutes. Got it figured out. I am Nick Havranek. I am the Engagement Strategies Coordinator here at University Libraries at Ball State, and I'm also the Assistant to the Executive Secretary of the Friends of the Alexander M. Bracken Library. And just as a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and will be uploaded to the University Library's YouTube channel, where we have a playlist of all of the past virtual Lunch and Learn events. Um, and these Lunch and Learns are held on the third Thursday of every month during the academic year, barring finals weeks and things like that. And they are meant to be a brief online program looking at faculty research and projects. These programs are always free and open to the public, so if you know someone who's interested in a topic in one of the upcoming events, feel free to share the link. They don't have to be affiliated with Ball State to attend. And this event is, as you can see, the Childcare and Women's Participation in the Workforce Estimates for Indiana and Overview of the Eastern Central Indiana TRAC Program. And in this presentation, Dagney Faulk presents the findings of a research brief examining the relationship between childcare availability and the level of women's participation in the workforce and the underlying financial factors that affect the demand for childcare services and the supply of childcare workers in Indiana. And Jeri McCorkle provides an overview of the Training, Resource, and Advocacy Connector, or TRAC, program that supports early care and learning efforts in East Central Indiana. TRAC is working to advance early care and learning, its professional workforce, communities, and economic development. And a little bit about our speakers. Dagney Faulk is the Director of Research in the Center for Business and Economic Research, or CBER. I hope I'm saying that acronym right.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. At Ball State University, her research focuses on regional economic development issues and state and local tax policy. She has worked on numerous Indiana-focused policy studies on a variety of topics, including analysis of fixed route bus transit, the regional distribution of state government taxes and expenditures, school choice, and property tax issues. She is co-author with Michael Hicks of the book Local Government Consolidation in the United States and co-editor with James Connolly and Emily Wernell of the book Vulnerable Communities, Research, Policy, and Practice in Small Cities. Prior to joining the CBER team, she was Associate Professor of Economics at Indiana University Southeast. She received her PhD in economics from the Andrew Young School of Policy Studies at Georgia State University. And Jeri McCorkle, a former elementary school teacher and a lifelong kid at heart, is passionate about changing the future. After leaving teaching, she spent 5 years as the director of First Five, Rush County's Early Learning Coalition. And in 2023, she joined Ball State University's Office of Community Engagement as the program manager for the TRAC program. TRAC supports early care and learning efforts in 9 counties in East Central Indiana, and their goals include building up early care and learning professionals, expanding childcare pipeline, and advocating for a system that provides excellent, affordable, community-stabilizing childcare for all of East Central Indiana. So with that, I will hand things off to Dagney.
Thank you, Nick. And thank you everybody for coming today. Next slide, please. So this is an outline of our presentation. I'm going to spend a part of a minute just talking a little bit about the literature on childcare affordability and availability and women's labor force participation. And then my part of the presentation looks at 3 issues: how increasing the number of childcare workers affects women's labor force participation, some estimates that we've done specifically for Indiana, and then some estimates looking at underlying financial factors that affect the demand for childcare services, and then a little work we've done on the supply side of childcare workers. and then there's part of the brief talks about public programs that are available here in Indiana. So I'll touch on that briefly and then turn it over to Jeri. Next slide, please. So just a brief overview of the literature here. There have been not a lot of studies, but a handful of studies, recent studies, that have looked at the relationship between childcare and various labor market outcomes. So these studies have generally shown that higher childcare costs lead to lower women's labor force participation, lowering the cost of formal childcare, that being childcare in a center environment, does increase the working hours of both parents. Reducing the out-of-pocket cost of childcare and increasing the availability of public childcare and education programs increases children's attendance and mothers' labor force participation and work hours. And then that subsidized childcare programs that support employment, so I can talk more about that if you're interested, have more impact on the labor supply of mothers than pre-kindergarten expansions. There's some debate in the literature about pre-kindergarten versus subsidized childcare, and there have been a few studies that have looked at that issue. Next slide, please. So the estimates that we've done, we did 2 sets of estimates and then some comparisons. So the first set of estimates look at how increasing the number of childcare workers affects women's labor force participation in Indiana. Oh, and I failed to say that the previous studies that I just reviewed, most of those use individual level data. So data on women either working or not working, so large data sets. We did not have access to that. So part of when we started working on this was figuring out what data was available and that we could use to do these sorts of estimates. So here in this, we use, I'll show you, oh, actually, that slide's not in here because we're on Jeri's. We use regional data to do some estimates from quarterly workforce indicators. So it's quarterly data on the number of women in different age groups that work in each of 11 regions in Indiana. And we do some regression models to get these estimates. So our findings are that for women aged 25 to 34, a 10% increase in the number of childcare workers in a region is associated with a 0.4% increase in the number of working women. So if you work through the math, that means that adding 100 more childcare workers leads to about 860 women in that age group entering or returning to work. We do that same sort of estimate for women aged 35 to 44. And we find a larger effect. A 10% increase in the number of childcare workers is associated with a 1% increase in working women. So again, working through the math, adding 100 more childcare workers would lead to about 2,300 more women in that age group returning or entering the workforce. And we focus on those age groups because those are the age groups in which women are primarily either childbearing age or child rearing age. We did the same estimates for women under age 25 and women aged 45 to 54, and there was not a significant relationship between the number of childcare workers and the number of women in the workforce. So that's why we focus on those 2 age groups. Next slide, please, Jeri. The next bit of analysis that we did in this brief was looking at the underlying financial factors that affect the demand for childcare services. So we make some assumptions about family size and earnings and the cost of childcare and taxes that will be paid. And then we do a simulation to look at the impact of childcare on take-home pay. So the assumptions that we make are we're dealing with a family of 4 where one spouse earns $57,000 a year. Okay, and the reason we chose $57,000 is because that's the level at which a family would not qualify for childcare subsidies in Indiana. We assume an hourly childcare cost of $525.28 an hour. And that comes from a sample of urban childcare centers. We took the average of median costs. And then we include federal and state income taxes and FICA taxes that this family would pay. We do not include local taxes. So these would be kind of a lower bound in terms of the estimates or simulation. And then we examine the net take-home pay if the second parent works 40 hours a week and the family pays for childcare. Next slide, please. So this graph shows the results of this simulation. So across the horizontal axis is the actual hourly pay, right? If say the mother usually, but it could be the father, works outside the home, in addition to the $57,000 that the I'll just say spouse one earns, and then the vertical axis is showing the take-home pay. So that's the net hourly wage after taxes and childcare costs. So you can see here that that second worker, if their actual hourly wage is $15 an hour, their take-home pay after taxes and paying for childcare is going to be negative. To earn minimum wage, so that's here, the actual hourly wage has to be a little bit over $26 an hour. To earn $400 a week, that's $10 an hour, and that would be about $20,800 a year. Take-home pay would have to be about $32 an hour. And then in contrast these numbers to the median wage for female workers in Indiana is about $21.53 an hour overall. So what this simulation shows is that the financial incentive for both parents to work outside the home is very modest, because in order to have take-home pay or a net hourly wage after taxes and childcare, the earnings for the second spouse working would have to be quite high. Next slide, please. Next, we look at the supply of childcare workers. So some things we know about that sector is that labor is the primary input in the childcare sector. There's not a lot of machines, as in manufacturing, it's primarily a service, and labor is the primary input. There are very few options for labor-saving technology. It's a relatively low skill and low wage sector. And there's lots of competition for workers when the labor market is tight, and it has been quite tight over the past couple years. The current unemployment rate seasonally adjusted in Indiana, August is the latest month that is available. It was 4.2%. So in contrast, which is quite low, still quite low historically. It was a minimum of 2.8% in March 2022. So it has increased. It's been slowly increasing for various reasons I can talk about if you're interested in, but it's still quite low by historic standards. And then a large share, these are some of the charts that we have in the brief, is that a large share of childcare workers are still in school currently, either high school or college. And then we did some estimates looking at what it would take to increase the number of childcare workers, and it would increasing the number of childcare workers by 10% would require an 8% increase in wages, which is a fairly substantial increase. I mean, if you think about most wage increases are like in the 1 to 2% range, typically. Next slide, please. And then this is one of the charts. There are several charts doing various comparison, but this is one of the charts just showing the competition in terms of wage differences for workers with similar skill sets. And you can see that retail workers and transportation and warehousing workers earn substantially more than childcare workers. These sectors require a similar educational background and have similar work hours. Next slide, please. And then just a little bit on public policies and programs available in Indiana. There is a child care voucher that's available. Here we list the requirements. So family income should be below 150% of the federal poverty level. It applies to children under age of 13. One of the parents must either be working or looking for work or attending some sort of schooling or training. And then the child care provider must meet certain standards. There's also an On My Way pre-K program that's funded by the state. It follows the children that are eligible have the same income or the same requirements as for the vouchers. There is a state licensing process for childcare workers, for childcare centers in Indiana. And then there is this Paths to Quality program that has been in place since 2000. If you have children in childcare, you may have seen the signs outside that say the level 3 or 4. There are many in this area that are level 3. Level 4 is the most quality, and there's a description in the brief too of what the levels are. So we can talk about that more, but for time's sake, I won't go into that here. So I'm going to turn it over to Jeri to talk about some work that she's been doing in this sector.
Okay. Thank you, Dagney. And I'll leave it on this slide for just a second. If you want to know more about any of these things, that falls within my realm as well. And so I'd be happy to share more about the very, very confusing and highly regulated system that child care providers operate within. It's a lot. But as Dagney and Nick said, I'm Jeri McCorkle. I work with the TRAC program, and the TRAC program is really here for the workforce that supports all those other workforces. So we're looking at women's participation in the labor force. Some of those women are in the child care industry itself, but in order for them to be able to participate in the workforce, they have to have a child care system, and the child care system is by definition a market failure. When we look at Oxford's definition of a market failure, it's an economic situation having issues with supply and demand. It has negative consequences for society, the environment, or individuals, and often requires intervention for resolution. And that very much is true. All parts of that are true for the child care system. Child care costs for even a single child in the birth to 5 range rival the costs of mortgages or college. And you think about, you save for years for college, you can get loans for mortgages and colleges, yet putting your child in childcare is not something that you build up a fund for. But the cost rivals those other costs as well, sorry. But if you are the childcare provider, if you are the ones caring for those children, you're very often making poverty level wages. We know that the 725 threshold is where several of our providers are, and the raises that they get don't even begin to make up the difference of where they need to take them out of those poverty level wages. So our TRAC program focuses the majority of our efforts on the early care and learning workforce. So that's ECL. So the child care system, early care and learning workforce are used interchangeably, but this system is so much more than child care. We are really working on a 2-generational effort here. 90% of the children's brain, our next generation, develops before they're 5 years old. 80% of it develops before they are 3 years old. So we're asking the workforce to live in poverty, but yet have such a huge impact on our children. 90% of their brain development, that's educational health. There are so many mental health aspects forming in the birth to 5 years, and their ability to bond with their caregivers is part of that. The CDC has done studies that this ACEs or adverse childhood experiences are now a public health crisis, and that's affecting our physical health long-term. So really, one of the answers to affect this too generationally is to have stable adults in their lives. And those stable adults are those child care providers while the families are in school or in work. So where did TRAC come from? We are part of the East Central Indiana Talent Collaborative, and that's talent. That's focusing on the adults in the region looking to build up East Central Indiana. All 9 of these counties are very active in our program and in the Talent Collaborative. The Talent Collaborative has the Birth 5 Coalition, School Age, Workforce Development, Industry. So there are several coalitions within that. And if you'd like to know more about that, I can connect you with Ashley Surface because she is our expert on that. But the Birth to 5 Regional Coalition met for 5 years from 2018 to 2023. We had a group of very passionate, very dedicated people going, how do we support the early care and learning workforce? Because that's the best way to support the children. And so we know COVID happened during that time. We continued to meet virtually. We were very organized, and when some READY dollars came out, READY 1.0 funding came out, we were ready, we were organized, and we put in an application, and we were awarded $1.5 million to move the needle on the early care and learning system in East Central Indiana, and given 3 years to do that. $1.5 million is going pretty quickly, but where it's not going is to investing in the salaries, the compensation of the workforce, and that's where it has to go. That is where the system will change, is when we can find ways to pay our professionals for the job that they're doing, in order for them to be able to sustain their own families, as well as to support the families and the children of the next generation. So Ball State is our backbone organization, and we've made some great contacts within Ball State and had some great supports and teamworks there, in addition to all of our experts in the region and working with the state as well. So we now have our strategic plan. We have finished year 1 of our 3 years, and let's talk about what we're doing with that funding. So if you've ever created a grant application, you know acronyms are king, because you can't fit everything in if you're trying to say all of the words. So our acronym that we landed on was TRAC. That is the Training, Resource, and Advocacy Connector. And they're so intertwined that they all go together, but we try and separate them out and attack all of the different issues as best we can. The T for the training, pouring into the workforce that is already there. If you go into this profession, you go into it normally because you have a passion for it. But we want to take that passion and skill it up. We want to take that passion and give them the knowledge and the skills to do the highly important job that they're doing. If they are a high school or college student, as Dagney mentioned, let's skill them up while they're there. We're impacting their ability to be parents in the future, and they're impacting those kids that they touch. You may be a college student for 4 years. That may be a child's early care and learning system that whole time. So we also have people who've been in the field for 20, 30, 40 or more years. They're passionate, they want to know more, but the time and the money needed for training are extensive. And so we're trying to build up that workforce to help them be the best they can do. We're also trying to build up the pipeline so that the future recognizes the impact that they can have. Someone put it to me yesterday that our youth today are very concerned about social justice. If you want to impact the future, impact children. Let's give them ways to do that. The R in our TRAC is for resources, and resources can come in the form of information, and we do that. Resources can come in the form of personal support. If you're in the early care and learning system, there are 6 regulatory agencies in the state who have a piece of the pie, who have a say in how you have to do your job. Keeping up with all of those is really a challenge. So part of our TRAC team are boots on the ground, county coordinators who are within each county saying, how can I help you? Let me give you a resource for this. Let me connect you with this person. Let me help you understand these regulations. And then those county coordinators are invaluable because they bring that information back to us as well. So it's a two-way communication path of what are they seeing, the boots on the ground in terms of the providers and the county coordinators. What are their needs? What are their strengths? How can we help all of them to do their job better? But the other big part of the resources is that we took a huge portion of our grant funding, almost $300,000, and are injecting it right back into the childcare system. We have 2 rounds of funding available where they can say, this is what I need to increase my quality level, the paths to quality that Dagney mentioned. This is what I need to expand my home so that I can serve more children. This is what I need to upgrade my materials after COVID. COVID was very hard on kids, but it was also very hard on the environment and all the cleaning and things. A lot of those needed upgraded and refurbished, and a lot of social emotional supports are coming in there as well. We know our kiddos are having troubles. We know the emotional concerns, social concerns have increased. And so if we can inject some funding back into the childcare providers, whether they are in homes, in churches, or in ministries, that's been a huge chunk of our funding, is making sure that that goes straight back to the classrooms and to the children. The A and C and TRAC are very intertwined, but the A is advocacy, trying to be the voice of the workforce. They are the ones who impact the children. But if you've ever spent a day with 1 2-year-old, let alone 5 2-year-olds, you don't have any energy at the end of the day to go and talk to your legislators, to make connections with your business leaders, to speak to the community at large, barely enough energy to speak to the parents or the future parents. So how can we be the voice of the workforce for what they want, what they need, and what they deserve? And so we communicate that out as much as we can. And I'll say it again, childcare costs are one of the largest percents of people's budgets. It's as large or larger than their mortgage. It's as large or larger than their college bills. And how much do we hear about people paying off college debts? And think about when you need childcare, it's early in your career. So you're still paying off those college debts. You're not at your highest earning wages in your career. And you incur these huge expenses. And our childcare providers are not getting rich off of you. I promise. I promise that when they are making double digits, they're feeling like they have made it. And so really trying to communicate upwards and downwards the impact of what early care and learning has on kids and how to affect the providers as well. So you saw a lot of charts from Dagney. So this one is connected to the families. So the Department of Health and Human Services said, really, when we look at budgets, childcare is affordable if it costs no more than 7% of a family's income. Well, that 7% across there, every one of our 9 counties are more than that, and most of them are more than 10% of a family's income. And that may only be with 1 child. And so imagine having multiple children, imagine having a single adult household. Those numbers are astronomically high percentage of their income that they're spending on childcare. And especially in our single parent families, they have to work. People say people don't want to work. I don't buy into that, but financially to find childcare that meets your hours, meets your needs, and is great for your kiddos, it's a challenge and it's expensive. Let's look at it another way. And so this one leans more into the way Dagney looked at things. This is the economic side of things. So this is the amount of money that Hoosiers are losing, and I have an updated stat on that. Insufficient child care availability is costing Indiana $4.2 billion in lost economic activity every year. So if we want these adults in the workforce, and we want them there every day, and we want them there present mentally, we need to have places for their children to be safe, learning, and open every day. And so that's why it's so important to us to build up that child care system so that the moms and the dads and all the other family members that are often helping to raise children are able to go to be in our economic development system and participate in the labor market. And I mentioned earlier that we are working with a lot of Ball State opportunities. So if you are familiar with the Early Childhood, Youth, and Family Services, they have, I think I said that acronym right. We're trying to help support some of their programs and working with them as well. We are working with a CAP project, Dr. Yu, who I think I saw on here. Hello, Dr. Yu. Her students are looking at how can we open and sustain childcare for a broader market throughout the region. We couldn't take the money that we got and open a childcare center and that serves our region. It doesn't work that way regionally. The majority of the problem is having funding for the workforce. And opening a childcare center does not increase the availability of the early care and learning workforce. So I appreciate all of Ball State's support on these. And if this is something that you want to know more about or want to get more involved with, we do have a Facebook page, ECI TRAC. We'd love to have you take a look at what's going on in the region there. And then, as I said, we have our strategic plan done. We don't have our own website yet. We're working on that through the East Central Indiana Talent Collaborative. But if you look at ecitalent.org, you can find a link to our strategic plan. And I'll just finish with this. As we were planning this out, as we were looking at what really matters to us in our region, our North Star is to build a strong foundation that East Central Indiana uses and Indiana sees as a model to advance early care and learning, its professional workforce, communities, and economic development. There we go. Let me stop sharing, and then if we have questions, I would be happy to take any of those. Oh, you went away. There we go.
Thank you both so much. And yes, if anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute yourselves. If not, I have a question. So Dagney, you mentioned that there were 4 levels of childcare providers. Could you kind of expand on what those 4 levels mean? Like what makes someone a 1 and what's a 4 look like?
Yeah, that's the Pathways to Quality program. So level 1 means that the health and safety needs of children are met. Level 2 means the environment supports children's learning. Level 3, those providers would have a planned curriculum that guides child development and school readiness. And then level 4 is the national accreditation, which is the highest indicator of quality.
Okay, so the 1 is basically just they will care for the child, and then
Yeah.
as it goes up, they increase their curriculum, kind of.
Yes, 1 is the child's in a safe place, whereas 4 is an accredited curriculum.
Okay, thank you.
And if I could build on that, in Indiana, you don't have to be licensed to provide childcare. It is not illegal to provide childcare as long as you're staying within certain ratios, numbers, safe environment, et cetera. The first step that we ask providers to do is to get licensed. And that is all about the health and safety of their surroundings. And again, that licensing process can happen in homes, in ministries, or in centers. If you see a childcare provider who is on level 1, that is not a negative. That means they have voluntarily joined this system. It's not required. It's a voluntary quality rating system. And so it is a step in the right direction. It is a positive thing. Higher is obviously got positives to those, but it's not a negative to see a childcare provider as a level 1. It's often a starting point.
Okay, thank you. Looks like Richard has a question.
Yeah, thanks. Super interesting. I'm actually, we haven't really started yet, but we have some funding to give support to women in need around the time of childbirth, financial support to take some time off work in the absence of paid family leave. So sort of the initial part of this problem before you get even to the age of 5. I'm curious sort of the public policy landscape regarding this in our state, right? So the point about pay being horribly low and childcare being expensively high are inextricably linked, right? To pay people more, usually you have to charge more, basic sort of economic kind of theory. And so we really need sort of childcare subsidies to sort of offset that kind of thing. So I'm just curious to hear some context, if you have any, about the discussion from a policy standpoint within the state. I know this isn't an Indiana issue, this is a national crisis, but just sort of if there's been any movement at all toward increasing funding for childcare. I know you mentioned some advocacy, excuse me, so I'm just sort of curious sort of what's happening.
I'll take this one first, Dagney, if that's
Okay.
all right. It is getting a lot of discussion. And that is the key point, is trying to get them to understand and see it from different angles. There are some models out there in different states where they're trying to look at splitting some of those childcare costs. One of the ones in Michigan and some other states is called a tri-share model, where the parents are only paying a third of that cost, the employers and then the government are subsidizing and committing to those as well. And that's receiving some positive attention. Indiana right now is trying to look at it through a lens of deregulation, trying to, I think, cut out some of the middleman parts of it. And that's meeting with mixed success, because we don't want it to proceed in a way that impacts safety or the quality of learning pieces of it. And so it's not been last year wasn't a budget year, and this year is a budget year without much budget to work with. So we're focusing on educating them on the long-term impacts for not only the next generation, but on community development and economic impacts of getting more adults back into the labor force. But I really think it's a broken system. It's going to require more subsidies, but nobody's quite figured out how to do that yet.
And so, Jeri, you mentioned that there were 6 state agencies that have some sort of regulatory authority over childcare?
Yes.
And can you provide a little more information about that?
Well, for example, one of those is FSSA. They receive our CCDF, the Child Care Development Block Grant. And so then they administer that. And that's where some of the subsidies, the Head Start, the On My Way pre-K, some of those come through, but they are separate from the agency that license providers. And they are separate from the agency that does Paths to Quality. So there's just so many different organizations working on it that it's very overwhelming for providers. And none of the jobs in there are super high paying as well. So as they have so much turnover, it's hard to form relationships with those consultants who have a very huge impact on your business. Does that help? Richard, I don't know if I answered your question or if there's more.
I was nodding but not speaking. Sorry. Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right. Happy to follow up with you after this if you're interested.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
Okay, it looks like we have a question from Kara.
Yeah, hi, thank you. And I apologize for my driving here. I'm always on the road, but I also know what it's like to present to a bunch of black boxes. So thanks for your patience. So I love what you all are about. I feel like you're like telling my story as a woman with multiple kids and multiple kind of starts and stops to my own professional journey. And also I'm a social worker by trade. And so I see this a lot in our rural communities in particular. I guess my question for you is, I know Dagney initially, in some of those slides you mentioned, sort of that percentage increase that we see, spouse 2 joining the workforce when we add X number, but it didn't really kind of extrapolate out to like older generations. I guess my question is, have you seen any correlation with those communities that are struggling with, you know, the drug epidemic? Like, as a social worker out in communities, I see kind of the parents' generation just sort of missing, right? Where we have a lot of grandparents that are caring for grandchildren. How much do you anticipate that we'll continue to kind of see a correlation there, if any? I'm just wondering, not articulating myself well, but I'm wondering if you can speak to any of those other generations as far as kind of what rural Indiana in particular is facing. Does that make sense?
So yeah, if I understand correctly, you want to know about how other household types are impacted. So it might be grandparents on a fixed income as opposed to a 2-earner family, or it might be a single-headed household, or yeah.
That's
And
right.
yeah. And the impacts are more extreme, right? Because the income of the single family household is probably lower, but then that's probably the household that would qualify for a voucher. And then the grandparents, that's a great question. I have not, you know, you hear anecdotal stories about that even in the media, that comes up often, but we haven't looked at that particularly, but I would think that might be in the same category where that would be a household that might get a voucher. So I haven't answered that well. I have to think more.
I didn't ask it well, but in my experience, you know, I know the two of you know, but for others on the call, I'm with the Indiana Communities Institute. We do community and economic development primarily in rural communities throughout the state. And my evidence is purely anecdotal as well, but just I get the sense that that sort of parental generation, because of how we've seen the uptick in drug use, they're missing a lot. And I just worry about sort of this childcare, how these threads are kind of interwoven, is really fascinating to me. So anyway, just curious if you'd stumbled upon any findings there.
And Jeri, I don't know if you have anything you want to add.
Kara, I don't have data to support this, but some of the thoughts that kind of came in response to your question there was, we know that if we can increase the quality of the experiences kids in those homes are having in those first 5 years. So you mentioned the drug crisis. If we could increase the quality of those first 5 years, that could change the trajectory of those children's lives.
Yeah.
Seriously, it's not one of those things you just say. Of impacting how the brain connections are made and the environments and the exposure to positive social experiences can definitely be a huge change. It's a challenge to create those relationships, right? Because childcare involves a relationship, and in ensuring that children are in safe situations and that families are safe. It adds an extra layer of complexity to it, but a very important one to keep in mind. And then thinking about grandparents, we have more older adults in the workforce than ever before who might have in the past been a childcare solution for families.
Yeah.
And so we see that when we'll talk to business owners, we have been told, oh, my workforce doesn't have kids. It doesn't impact us. And our question is always, first of all, what part of the workforce are you missing out on? That aren't able to be potential employees. And if you want to talk about childcare, talk to the older generation. If it's affecting their grandbabies, they care. They have opinions and they care. And it's an untapped market that I don't think employers think about, that there are solutions there and can contribute to the problems and the solutions as well if we make sure that we include them in the conversation.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Right. Well, looks like we're nearing the end of our
Looks
hours.
like we have one more question,
Oh,
Nick.
do we?
Yes, I have. Hi, thank you
Oh,
so much
hi.
for this talk. Yep, I kind of snuck in.
Sorry.
My name is Katie, and I study the interconnections between work and family and the implications it has for women. And I've done it for typically women who are in male-dominated fields, right? So like STEM. And after having kids and having them go through the childcare system, I am like shocked by it, right? Like it was very shocking to me how broken the system is and how much like we don't respect childcare workers. Even the terminology that we use, like an unskilled workforce, like there are so many skills that are required of childcare workers that I myself would never do. And so like the system's clearly broken, is clearly important for society. Like what is the holdup that we can't fix it? Like we have a K through 12 system. Like what is it about this childcare that there's so much resistance to getting anything done as a society? I just don't get it because it seems so obvious to me. And maybe I'm just coming from a perspective that I'm like failing to consider these other things.
That is a great question. I have been struggling with that myself. What is the issue? I mean, part of it is, I think, the regulation. But, the same on my end when I had kids in childcare. I mean, it's never perfect, but you got to have it. So, if you're going to work, you got to have it. So, I don't know, Jeri, do you have any?
It is a female-dominated workforce. The people who are making decisions are often at an income level that has allowed them to be much choosier on their childcare options, and maybe haven't been in the stage of life where they've needed to deal with the childcare system in quite a while. And you know how with those memories, some of those things fade. It's interesting because we never use the term babysitter in our work, but that's the perception that many of them have. Oh, all they're doing is sitting on the baby, sitting with the baby. But if you expose a child to high quality experiences versus sitting in front of a screen, you have very different inputs and knowledge required, and you get very different outcomes from them. We had a quote that I came across just this week from the Wellesley Center for Women, and it said, childcare is the backbone of the economy. If we want our economy to grow and thrive, then you have to have childcare, because if you want men and women and people to work in your economy, you cannot leave those babies home alone. Yet our highest paid birth to 5 workers are probably preschool teachers right now. And preschool teachers currently are making less than what kindergarten teachers made 20 years ago.
Yeah,
So
it is
is it that
shockingly
we
low.
need an organized system like the K-12 system? Do we need an expansion of that? Possibly. But the system is still very broken. And Katie, if you have thoughts on how we can get that word out there about the importance of it, both short term for the economic development, because that is what decision makers are listening to right now, and plus have a win for long term for the next generation. That's what we're shooting for. That's why we're so grateful for Dagney and her research. We see it day to day. We have all the anecdotal evidence, but I appreciate the people that have the economic evidence to support it.
Okay. Well, there are no more questions. I don't think there are. Thank you both so much. Your research and work is super important. I love hearing all about this. The university libraries here actually did some work with the Muncie by 5, so we're kind of familiar with that system in that way. And I just want to say, we're all very excited to be part of this like interdisciplinary dialogue and kind of spark some advocacy for these types of things. So thank you very much for letting us being a part of this conversation. And
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And thank you
Appreciate it.
all
Would
for
love to
attending.
follow up the conversation with anyone who's interested.
Yes, of course. Please reach out if you want to keep this conversation going. But thank you all for attending. And just as a reminder, this video will be uploaded to the YouTube channel for university libraries. So if somebody needs to see this, send it to them. And our next Lunch and Learn will be on November 21st with Kristen Berry from from CAP. So yeah, stay tuned for that. And thank you again. Have a great day.
Thank
You
you.
too, thanks.